Well, Ghostbusters Frozen Empire came to home video this week, and I found it to be missing some vital ingredients that really made the first one work for me so well. But what were those ingredients? I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. The IMDb synopsis for Ghostbusters Frozen Empire says, when the discovery of an ancient artifact unleashes an evil force, Ghostbusters, new and old, and a whole bunch of other folks, I guess, too, must join forces to protect their home and save the world from a second ice age. Okay, so the main thing that is different about this, certainly compared to the first movie, I think in some ways compared to Afterlife, the movie that just came before it, is the tone. There are lots of jokes happening, and it has a very MCU kind of humor vibe to me that's based largely on these only superficial recognitions of the stakes and the danger and obvious statement of present circumstances. So, for example, this isn't a line in the movie, but like someone saying, I am totally seeing a ghost right now. This is a real thing that's really happening. You know, it's that kind of like overly obvious statement, but just a token given to actually being afraid and freaked out about it in a way that a person actually would, you know, compared to how a person actually would. Ghosts are arguably commonplace. Police, at least this gag that they keep coming back, they come back to twice, of this squad car with two cops in it, they treat the ghost, you know, that's screaming through the street and the Ghostbusters vehicle going after it as just kind of like a common nuisance. Should we call it? No, they got this one, you know. Ghosts are sometimes dangerous, but they mostly seem to be mischievous, and several are designed like straight up physical creatures. They're not even translucent, transparent. They're just little monsters or something, rather than immaterial specters. The threat also, with ice being this major theme, is turning very physical as well. And I'm just like, this is getting kind of off track from the core concept, I feel like, at least in terms of the way it's presented and the kinds of things that are focused on. Speaking of focus, there is a family drama dynamic that is at the center of the movie. Although I think there's barely a center to this movie with all the characters being thrown in the mix. They're trying to bring in all the kids from Afterlife, but yet sideline a few of them because maybe they're realizing we need to prioritize some. But we're also bringing back old core members of the Ghostbusters cast, as well as like complete one-off, like in one scene types of characters from the first Ghostbusters movie. Just like, hey, remember these guys too? You know, there's only so many cast members we could find, but we found this guy. Let's give him a part and stick him in here. I don't know if that's really the thinking. That's not a very charitable view of how this was written, but that is certainly how it felt to me. Now, that family drama dynamic at the center, I like the dynamics of family dramas. So on its own merits, it's not unwelcome, but like Afterlife, this is an element that makes this very different from the first two movies. Afterlife also became more of like a Goonies type of movie, a movie about kids. And I'm like, this does not feel like Ghostbusters. Well, they brought in more adults, more adult comedians in this movie. And I think that does get it closer to what, you know, the original movie had at its core as its strength, which is really strong adult comedic performers. Could this franchise continue and eventually get back to full-on adult comedic performers? I don't know. They're really sticking with these kids. But like there's two things that I think that make this movie different from the first movie. And really what makes that first movie different from all the movies following it, including to a significant degree, Ghostbusters 2, which had the same cast, had those same strong performers, but still wasn't received as well. When I went back and rewatched it last year, I was like, yeah, it's all right, but I mean, it's not as strong as the first. Why was that? And I think it's because not since the first movie have we had reactions to ghosts that were closer to actual fear and terror, of the kind that we should expect. Not the overblown comedic, running through the street, but like someone actually looking afraid, like I would see in maybe a drama or in a scary movie or something, it might be played for comedy in terms of like the moment of the movie, but the performance, it still felt like, okay, that's someone that is actually, that seems to be afraid. Maybe it's just dialed up just a little bit, but it still feels closer to real fear than what was displayed by the performers in this movie. Let's see. The second thing is having wild circumstances, which of course we still have in all the other Ghostbusters movies, but wild circumstances contrasted with deadpan straightness. Now, that's not something that was the case across the board, but two major components delivering on that were, of course, Bill Murray, who's probably the actor, the performer that people most remember and had the funniest moments in, on average, in the first one, because he is in this deadpan way that has zero value for people and the situations that he's in. He's kind of calling it all ridiculous. He is mocking the proceedings, and that dynamic, that contrast, is what really generated some laughs for me, and I suspect for a lot of people, even if they might not really realize this is what's making me laugh. Even though Bill Murray in those movies, we're kind of recognizing in the context of the other characters he's with, is kind of a sociopath. Like, he really, bizarrely, does not seem to care about anybody else. He just seems like a horrible, narcissistic, almost a sociopath, you know? So, I mean, it was really, really striking. Harold Ramis, though, also, as Egon in that original movie, was taking the most ridiculous situations with deadpan seriousness. And so there's humor generated in those kinds of things, and those components are not present in the movies that followed. Certainly not to the same degree. You get it maybe a little bit in Ghostbusters 2. I think arguably there's some in the Answer the Call, all-female cast of Ghostbusters. I know that's a very divisive opinion to say anything good about that one. I actually really like that one. I would probably rank it my number 2 of the Ghostbusters movies. Anyway, so the flavor of this movie, and Afterlife kind of too, I guess I'm talking about, may have understandably been mistaken as basically the same. You know, we've got ghosts doing stuff and people are reacting like, there are ghosts, we gotta get away. And there's jokes going on at the same time, wisecracking jokes, right? That's a Ghostbusters movie. Well, you gotta zero in a little bit more on some specifics to really get that Ghostbuster flavor from the first movie, I think. If no one truly seems terrified of ghosts, no one takes the wild spectacle with unusual deadpan seriousness. There is one exception in this movie. He's a very side character. He got one chuckle out of me. I wish that he would have been like the new Egon and totally in the main cast, but he was just kind of a side character. And if no one is mocking the proceedings, then you have a movie with some really key elements of flavor absent, resulting in a tone that just doesn't feel the same, even if we can't immediately identify why. Now, does that mean that this is a bad movie, that it's quote-unquote not funny? I'm only talking about my own tastes, and I admittedly seem to have a pretty narrow sense of humor in terms of what actually makes me laugh. But yeah, I was not laughing. I was not laughing. Despite cramming in tons of old actors and frequent reminders of parts we liked in the first movie, this movie doesn't bring forward what made the first one work so well for me, or create a new flavor that works for me either. Although folks still laughing at and enjoying MCU movies might find some fun here. So don't rule it out if you've been still laughing at and enjoying those. Let's see here. As far as the cast goes, Bill Murray's the standout. That's so sad to say that. And it's not just because I have nostalgia for Bill Murray. I've not seen a lot of Bill Murray movies. You know, it's not like, oh man, I love that comedian. Oh, here's his scene. Oh, I'm excited to see him. There wasn't any of that. But his short scene, I mean, he was in several scenes, but there was one scene where he really got focus. And in that scene, I suddenly was laughing like 3 times right in a row when I sat through the rest of the movie in almost complete silence and just disinterest. There was, as I mentioned earlier, a side character who was very deadpan, very Egon-like. He gave me one good chuckle. But sadly, he was barely in the movie. It was such a shame. Everyone else just kind of felt there to me, rather than this movie being the very performance-driven affair where everyone had this kind of like unusual character with unusual traits. I mean, you think about that first movie, and you think about Sigourney Weaver's character as kind of like the outsider, the grounded person that's just like doesn't have any patience for all this kind of silliness and stuff. You take Spengler's character, as I've already talked about, Egon, Ray. You take, what's the Winston Zed something, I can't remember what his last name is, but he brought a little bit of everyman that I think was really valuable. He didn't have as much of that in the second one because he was more acclimated to being a Ghostbuster, but he brought something very specific and valuable there. And then you had the dude, the nerd guy that ended up being like the keymaster or whatever, and the secretary. What's her name? Janine, I think. Anyway, all of these characters had very striking personality traits, and that just wasn't nearly the case if you look at the cast here. Maybe some of that's because they had too many characters and nobody really got enough time to really kind of settle in. Or maybe it's because their character traits were to have MCU style punchlines. I don't know. But there just wasn't the variation and the level of interest driven by performances for these characters here. And let's see what else. Yeah. No, I guess that's about it as far as acting goes. Stunts and visuals, well, lots of CG looking CG. I don't really feel like I need to belabor this. I want to get out of this as soon as possible. Let's talk about something I liked. And that's a theme in this movie that I thought is very valuable, very applicable. Phoebe Spengler, Egon's granddaughter, is sidelined early on in this movie, not by the script. She's very central to the script, but as a Ghostbuster, she is sidelined. And she feels very ousted by her family, understandably, in that situation. She feels alone and lonely and feeling like her purpose was taken from her. She ends up then going down a path that gets her in trouble, that starts with isolation, where there's no one to provide any kind of corrective or alternative perspective. She starts going down a dark path. And she forms a relationship that ultimately leads to harm. But in the end, what she really wants is to be loved by her family and included with them. It's so important for us to see, whether we are parents, whether we are siblings, whether we are still living with our parents, if there is a relational rift happening in a family, that is a time when dark paths are the most tempting, particularly for those who are isolating themselves or are feeling isolated, even if they're not actually isolated. And so we would do well to recognize that potential when there's a rift happening. Phoebe being sidelined was not a problem that could just be removed by someone changing their mind about something. Well, someone in power could change their mind, but there was government stuff involved. It was a requirement, at least for a time, for her to be sidelined in the way that she was. But Phoebe made the rift larger by lashing out in anger at her family. And her family made it worse by not persisting, not enduring in reaching out and loving her effectively. We have got to, in those moments, go against our feelings and our instincts that would normally separate us, that would put up walls, that would have us go isolate ourselves, go down whatever path, away from the people that are bothering us or hurting us. We have to go against those feelings and to withdraw. We got to go against the feelings to hold on to anger and instead look for ways that we can still love each other, even if there's great disagreement, to still love each other and to be involved and included in each other's lives, to find those ongoing times of connection. Otherwise, we risk isolation leading someone to darker and damaging outcomes. So I really appreciated that through line and the way that it ultimately played out. All right, I have no idea what your tastes are in movies, but if I were a time traveler, I'd go back in time and say, Peter. Yeah, you got to skip this one. The writing team just isn't up to writing a comedy that you're going to laugh at. The direction doesn't lean into fear or performances in an engaging way for you either. So, yeah, you just got to skip this one. It's rated PG-13 for supernatural action slash violence, language, and suggestive references. Those are all of my thoughts for now on Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. As always, I'd love to get your thoughts and reactions in the comments below. Please like, share, subscribe, click that bell. I want to thank the Spirit Blade Insiders for making this review possible. You can get info about the benefits of joining over at patreon.com/spiritblade productions. Then I hope you'll check out our podcast and stay connected to all kinds of CGC content over at christiangeekcentral.com as we continue to geek out and seek the truth. For more chat about geek entertainment, answers to your questions, and news from the wider world of Christian geekery, get the Christian Geek Central podcast today on iTunes and other podcast services.